Couple things, Keith. I spent a long time explaining why monetary policy and Fed funds target rate and what the Fed does is irrelevant, has no impact on inflation, except for velocity, which is a behavioral factor. There's nothing the Fed has any control over. So I sort of dismissed monetary policy as having any impact on inflation. Apologies to my Austrian friends, but but it doesn't. But fiscal policy is very powerful. Mm-hmm. Fiscal policy goes straight to inflation because there you're actually handing people the money.
Yes.
The thing is, creating excess reserves on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, who cares? I mean, it's like Jamie Dimon gets a little spread and good for him, but it has nothing to do with the real world. That money's not being lent, it's not being spent, it's not being multiplied, it just sits there, it's sterilized. But fiscal policy is different. When you start handing out checks, people are going to spend it. And what did we have? So we have about $1 trillion, slightly higher baseline budget deficit. So baseline means if we didn't have any extras, if we weren't like trying to spend money in Ukraine and Israel and Build Back Better and the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green New Scam, if we weren't doing any of those things, we'd have $1 trillion deficit. But we're doing all of those things. And I would
and more's coming.
Yeah, more's coming. And I would fault Trump and Biden. So Trump, at the depths of the pandemic, kind of June 2020, hands out $1,400. They just gave it to you. You had all you needed was a pulse. You didn't no paperwork. You just got the money. Not to mention $1 billion, about 900 million. 900 billion on the Payroll Protection Plan Act for basically if you didn't fire your employees for a year, you got a year's salary.
The ERP program? You get 26 grand per employee.
That's different. Sorry,
is that different? Or
no, you're right about that.
There's that too.
There's that too.
All sorts of
you're right. There's that too. You're right. That's a whole scam.
Yeah, $1,400 is nothing. If you're actually plugged in, you get the 26 grand per employee.
Right, but well, that's right.
Those are the serious satellite commercials that like, hey,
I talked to a really smart analyst about this, and he's like, I think this is having an impact, but I can't quite quantify it. I can't put my finger on it. So I said, I have empirical data for you that will actually back you up. And he said, oh, what is it? I said, radio commercials. Because if you're in the car, the radio commercial, they simulcast the TV, but they don't give you the same commercials because the radio commercials are cheaper. So that's where you get the get out of jail free card for tax fraud and all this stuff. But they kind of faded, and the REITs kind of faded, and now it's all this. I forget the exact name, but the employer retention credit or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you're right, that's a huge program and a huge scam as it turns out, but that's in addition to the payroll protection plan that I was talking about, which is in addition to this stimulus checks. So then Trump gets to the end of the term, it's December, he hands out another $600, so now that's $2,000 per citizen, 300 million people. And then Biden comes in and goes, hold my beer, and he does. He said, if Trump can do it, I can do it too. So he does $1,600 per head in February 2021, and then they kept going because they had the Inflation Reduction Act, Build Back Better, the Infrastructure Act, all the things we mentioned. Well, and then don't get me started on 100 billion, 60 billion more on the way for Ukraine. And a lot else. So the point is the actual budget deficit has been running over 2 trillion relative to a baseline of 1 trillion, and you do that for 4 years, you get $8 trillion or probably close to $10 trillion, which is exactly what happened. The national debt's $34 trillion, but at the beginning of Trump's administration, it was about 21, and then Trump ramped it up to the high 20s, and then Biden took it right to 34, which is where it is now, and the debt to GDP ratio is 125%. Impression that it doesn't actually matter. And that is modern monetary theory. And my friend Stephanie Kelton, she's the big brain, professor at SUNY, Stony Brook, I believe that's her campus.
She's the only person, by the way, that won't do a real conversation with me. Even Laser Eyes Mike Saylor did one.
Yeah.
I mean,
fair
wonder
enough.
why.
Yeah. I've invited her. I've met her. I know her. I've invited her to, we'll have a debate. So I can find a host. We get a studio somewhere. She won't do it. But I recommend her book, The Deficit Myth.
Yep.
Every single thing in that book is wrong, but you should read it to understand how they think.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, I used to be Pravda during the Cold War, and people say, Jim, why do you read it? It's all lies. I go, that's why I read it. Because you want to know what your enemy's lying about, because that's what matters to them.
Yes.
There's an inferential thing that you can do there. So read that book. It's all wrong, but it's an encyclopedia of all the wrong thinking. By the way, she's not, she's the big brain of this, and there's a Bard College, I think, has a think tank on this. But she was the advisor to Bernie Sanders when he was head of the Senate Banking Committee. The Budget Committee. So when the Democrats had the majority in the Senate, Bernie Sanders ran the budget, and she was his advisor and an advisor to his 2016 campaign. I'm not sure I don't know what she was doing in 2020. But the point is, she goes way back. She has a Hill career in addition to an academic career. And actually her inspiration was Warren Mosler. You may know Adam's founder, Mosler, but
Weird dude.
yeah, well, I used to bump into him in St. Croix because I lived down there for a couple of years. But he was running for a non-voting congressman from St. Croix, so I used to listen to his commercials on the way to work. But I'll spare everyone the story. Warren got his kids to do chores by paying them in his business cards, printed money, in other words. And he said, then when you accumulate these business cards, you can, and if you want like an allowance or something, you can come to me with however many business cards, and I'll redeem them for a certain amount, and then you can go to the movies or whatever you do. And I guess Stephanie was like a house guest, and she saw this and goes, aha, you can print as many business cards as you want. And then she just kind of took it from there. But I doubt there are more than 2 or 3 members of Congress who can say modern monetary theory, but they're all practicing it.
Yes.
It has taken over the mindset in Washington. And then they go, hey, look at Japan. Their debt to GDP is 300%. We got a long way to go.
I mean, she is.
She has a very high IQ, but she doesn't know what she's doing.
But she knows. She thinks they know what they're doing.
Oh yeah.
Like these numbers they came from that architecture.
Right. So let's get
It
back.
wasn't voted on.
So going back to where you started, Keith, with the debt to GDP ratio, 125%. Okay, we're there for a lot of reasons, and both parties are in on it. But what does it actually mean? And that was the question you asked. And we know the answer to that. We've got decades of empirical. We know the answer, but they're just now asking the question. You're right. Oh, gee, is this a big number? And what I say is, look, 34 trillion is a big, scary number, but it means nothing unless you compare it to GDP, unless you look at the ratio. Because I say, if you owe $50,000 on a MasterCard, if you make $500,000, no big deal. You write a check. If you make $20,000, you're probably going broke. So you can't get any information out of the $50,000 balance. You have to say, how much money am I making relative to that balance? So now, getting back to debt to GDP, 34 trillion doesn't mean anything unless you put it in the context of GDP, which is how much you're making. In other words, what's your economy actually worth? And now Carmen Reinhart, who's the chief economist of the World Bank, and Ken Rogoff is a full professor at Harvard, and Carmen was at Harvard and University of Maryland before she went to the World Bank. They wrote the book, This Time Is Different, great book. But they've done a ton of empirical research coming out in their papers. I recommend reading, the book's good, but I recommend reading their papers.
What, This Time Is Different by Reinhart?
Yeah, Reinhart.
Because it shows you hundreds of years of deficits and debts and what
and
the outcomes became.
Right, and they've done a lot more since the book came out, and they've sliced it every which way. Developed economies only, developing economies only, last 10 years, last 100 years. So they've sliced it, and they always get the same result, which is the following. I know this is going to upset a lot of people, but I'm going to mention the word Keynesian multiplier. There is such a thing as a Keynesian multiplier. It's not a free lunch, but it is true that at certain levels of debt,